I need to get married by tomorrow. Denise's choked voice cut through the silent corridor of the penthouse like a confession torn by force. Daniel Carter stopped mid-stride, his Italian leather shoes frozen on the imported marble floor. It was nearly 11 at night, and he was heading down for water, never imagining that single sentence would change his life forever. In the kitchen, his housekeeper spoke on the phone between muffled sobs, unaware that someone was listening. Daniel had known Denise for 3 years. A black woman of 32, discreet, efficient, nearly invisible in the way she kept his home running perfectly. He had never seen her like this, vulnerable, desperate, human. I know it sounds crazy, Tina. But if I show up alone at that wedding, Uncle Raymond is going to destroy what's left of my dignity in front of the whole family. The name made Daniel frown. Who was this Uncle Raymond who caused such terror? Denise continued, her voice trembling. You don't understand. He spent 20 years humiliating my mother for being poor, calling her a failure, dead weight on the family. My mother died believing she was worthless. And now he wants to do the same to me. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He knew all too well the weight of carrying wounds caused by family. Monique deserves to have her perfect wedding without me causing drama. But if I go alone, Raymond will corner me like he always does. He'll ask in front of everyone why I'm still a housekeeper at 32. He'll say I'm just like my mother. And I. Denise's voice broke. I can't take it anymore, Tina. I just can't. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of muffled crying. Daniel should have walked away. He should have gone back to his room and pretended he heard nothing. That's what any sensible employer would do. But something in that genuine pain kept him rooted in that dark corridor, unable to move. At 44, Daniel had built a tech company valued at hundreds of millions. He had everything money could buy. But every night he returned to an empty Manhattan penthouse where the echo of his own footsteps was his only company. He knew exactly what loneliness was. He knew what it meant to carry wounds no one could see. Denise hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen, her shoulders shaking as she tried to contain her tears. That's when she turned to leave and came face to face with Daniel standing in the doorway. The horror in her eyes was immediate. The shame of being caught in her most vulnerable moment colored her cheeks an intense red. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. How long has this Uncle Raymond been mistreating your family? The direct question caught her off guard. Denise blinked several times, processing that he had heard everything. Sir, please forget what you heard. It won't happen again, I promise. Denise. Daniel's voice was firm but surprisingly gentle. I'm not angry. I'm asking because I want to understand. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some hidden trap. When she found none, her shoulders slumped in defeat. 23 years, she whispered. Since my grandfather died and left everything to Raymond, even though he knew half should have gone to my mother. Daniel noticed something pass through her eyes. Something beyond pain. A shadow of old anger, carefully stored away. Your mother didn't contest the will. She tried. But Raymond had expensive lawyers, and she could barely pay rent. She gave up after 2 years of fighting alone. What no one in that kitchen knew, not even Daniel who prided himself on reading people like open books, was that inside Denise's worn bag, hidden in a yellowed envelope, were documents she had found 6 months ago. Documents proving that Raymond had forged their grandfather's signature on the will. Documents that could destroy the empire built on her mother's misery. But evidence without power is just paper. And Denise had never had power. Until now. Daniel watched her for a moment, a decision forming in his mind that even he didn't fully understand. Perhaps it was years of loneliness finally taking its toll. Perhaps it was recognizing a pain that mirrored his own. Or perhaps it was simply the desire to, for the first time in his life, do something that truly mattered. What time is the wedding tomorrow? Denise's eyes widened. What? Your sister's wedding. What time does it start? If this story of family, secrets, and justice has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover what Daniel is about to propose, and how a simple favor would transform into the sweetest revenge Raymond could never have imagined. Denise stood frozen, trying to process a question that made no sense. 3 in the afternoon, she answered automatically. But why are you asking? Daniel took a deep breath, aware that his next words would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Because I'm going with you. The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have physical form. Denise opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. You need a fiancé for tomorrow, Daniel continued, his voice calm as if proposing a business meeting. I have no plans. I can be that person. This is crazy. Denise stepped back, as if needing physical distance to think. You're my employer. I clean your house. You can't just show up at my sister's wedding pretending to be my fiancé. Why not? Because. She gestured vaguely, searching for obvious arguments that suddenly seemed slippery. Because no one will believe it. Because it's strange. Because you're. She stopped, blushing. Too rich? Too white? The brutal honesty made her swallow hard. Both. Daniel almost smiled. Denise, I spent 20 years building a company pretending to have confidence I didn't have. I can pretend to be your fiancé for a few hours. But why? The question came loaded with genuine distrust. You barely speak to me in 3 years. Why would you suddenly want to help me? It was a fair question. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. Because I know what it's like to have someone in your own family trying to destroy you. My father spent his whole life telling me I'd be nothing. Every success I've had was to prove him wrong. He paused. And because I'm tired of living in an empty house pretending it doesn't eat me up inside. The unexpected vulnerability completely disarmed Denise. For the first time, she saw something beyond the distant, formal businessman. She saw a man as lonely as herself. If I accept, she said slowly, it would only be for one day. Then we go back to normal. Deal. Denise bit her lip, waging an internal war. Every instinct screamed that this was a terrible idea. But the alternative was facing Raymond alone, and she simply didn't have the strength for that anymore. Okay, she whispered. But we need to agree on a story. My family will ask 1,000 questions. They spent the next 2 hours in the kitchen, constructing the narrative of their fake relationship. How they met, how long they'd been dating, what their future plans were. Daniel proved surprisingly good at creating convincing stories. It was near 1 a.m. when Denise finally found the courage to reveal what she'd been keeping for months. There's something you need to know, she said, her voice low as if the walls might hear. About Raymond. She went to her bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope, worn at the edges from being handled so much. She placed it on the table between them. 6 months ago, my grandmother passed away. When I went to help clean out her house, I found this hidden in the back of a closet. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside were old documents, some originals, some copies. Certificates, contracts, and most importantly, 2 versions of Denise's grandfather's will. One left everything to Raymond. The other, clearly older and with a notarized signature, divided the property equally between the 2 children, Raymond and Grace. He forged the will, Daniel said, not as a question. My grandmother knew. She kept the proof all these years but was afraid of him. Raymond is powerful in town. He knows judges, lawyers, important people. Denise's voice grew thick. My mother died without knowing she'd been right all along. She died thinking she was a failure who couldn't fight for what was hers. Daniel studied the documents with the eyes of someone who had spent decades analyzing contracts. The case was solid. With the right lawyers, Raymond would lose everything. Why didn't you ever use this? With what money? What support? Denise laughed without humor. I'm a housekeeper. He owns half the town. Who would believe me? Daniel closed the envelope and looked directly into her eyes. I believe you. The next morning, while Denise packed her small bag, Daniel made a call to Marcus Webb, his personal attorney for 15 years and the best estate fraud specialist on the East Coast. I need you to analyze some documents, said Daniel, his voice taking on the sharp tone he used in negotiations. And I need you available tomorrow night for possible emergency action. What are you up to, Daniel? Justice. He paused. The kind that should have been done 20 years ago. The drive to the small town in rural North Carolina took 4 hours. During the trip, Denise grew increasingly quiet, her fingers restless in her lap, her gaze lost in the passing landscape. Nervous? Daniel asked. Terrified. About the wedding or Raymond? Everything. She turned to look at him. Mostly about finding out this is a dream and waking up tomorrow still alone, still invisible, still unable to do anything. Daniel slowed the car and pulled onto the shoulder. He turned to her with a seriousness Denise had never seen. Listen carefully. You spent 3 years working in my house. 3 years being efficient, discreet, impeccable. You never asked for anything. Never complained. Never gave me reason to even remember you existed. He paused. That ends today. Today you exist. Today you have a voice. And today, Raymond will discover he underestimated the wrong person. Denise felt tears burn her eyes, but she blinked quickly to push them away. What if it doesn't work? It will work. Daniel started driving again. Because people like Raymond always make the same mistake. They think money and power make them untouchable. But arrogance is the mother of all downfalls. What neither of them knew yet was that Raymond had already been warned that Denise would be coming to the wedding. And he was preparing his own trap, a public humiliation that would ensure his niece never dared show her face at family events again. War was about to begin. And only one side would emerge victorious. The church was small and simple, decorated with white flowers and satin ribbons. The kind of place where generations of families had married, baptized children, and mourned their dead. Denise took a deep breath as she stepped out of the car, childhood memories flooding her mind. Ready? Daniel asked, offering his arm. No. She took it anyway. But let's go. Heads began turning as soon as they entered. Whispers rippled through the pews like waves. Denise could imagine what they were saying. Who is that man? Where did he come from? How did Denise, of all people, find someone like that? Monique came running, radiant in her wedding dress, eyes wide with surprise. You came. She hugged her sister tightly. And you brought someone? Daniel, said Denise. My fiancé. The words sounded strange on her lips, but Monique didn't seem to notice. She was too busy hugging Daniel as if he'd been family for years. I'm so happy. So happy you found someone, Denise. Mom would have been. Monique's voice faltered. Mom would have been so proud. The mention of her mother squeezed Denise's heart, but she kept her smile firm. The ceremony was beautiful. Denise cried when Monique said her vows, remembering all the times they dreamed together of this day as little girls. Daniel held her hand discreetly, a small gesture that meant more than he could know. It was at the reception that Raymond made his move. The community hall was filled with round tables, modest decorations, and homemade food. Raymond Preston, he circulated as if he owned the place. Suit too expensive for the occasion, ostentatious watch, smile of someone who considered himself superior to everyone there. When his eyes found Denise, something predatory gleamed in them. Well, well. His voice cut through the surrounding conversations like a knife. The prodigal daughter finally showed up. And apparently brought company. The room grew quiet. People sensed something was about to happen. Raymond walked to the table where Denise and Daniel were seated, his whiskey glass swaying casually. They told me you were engaged, Denise, but I confess I didn't believe it. He looked Daniel up and down with poorly disguised contempt. And who might the lucky one be? Or should I say, the poor fool who fell into her trap? Daniel's voice was pure ice. Daniel Carter. Pleasure. Raymond laughed. And what do you do, Mr. Carter? Besides apparently dating housekeepers. Some nervous laughter echoed. Denise felt her face burn. You know, I always wondered what happened to your mother, Raymond continued, his cruelty gaining momentum. Poor Grace. Spent her whole life crying over an inheritance that was never hers, filling her daughters' heads with stories of injustice. He sighed theatrically. Some people are simply born to be failures. It's genetic, I suppose. The room was completely silent now. Monique looked ready to cry. Denise trembled, containing decades of rage. And you, Denise? Raymond moved closer, lowering his voice so only she and Daniel could hear. Still working as a maid? Cleaning other people's dirt? Your mother must be turning in her grave from shame. That's when Daniel stood up. Not abruptly or aggressively. With the controlled calm of someone who holds all the power and knows exactly when to use it. Mr. Raymond Preston, said Daniel, his voice projecting effortlessly. You mentioned inheritance. How convenient. Because I have some questions about William Preston's will. Your father. Something flickered in Raymond's eyes. A shadow of uncertainty. Who the hell do you think you are? Daniel Carter. CEO of Carter Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it. Daniel pulled out his phone. And in the last 12 hours, my legal team has analyzed some very interesting documents. Documents that were hidden in your mother's house for over 2 decades. Color began draining from Raymond's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Daniel turned the phone, showing a photo of the original will. This is William Preston's real will, dated and notarized 3 months before his death. It divides the property equally between his 2 children, Raymond and Grace. Murmurs exploded through the room. That's a lie. Raymond stepped forward. That document is fake. The fake document is the one you presented in court in 2001. Daniel maintained his unshakable calm. My forensic handwriting experts have already confirmed it. The signature was forged. The notary office that supposedly authenticated it had no record of the transaction. He paused. You stole your own sister's inheritance. Raymond looked around, seeking allies, but found only looks of shock and horror. You can't prove anything, he hissed. That was over 20 years ago. The statute of limitations has passed. Document fraud doesn't have a statute of limitations when there's proven bad faith. My lawyer is filing the lawsuit as we speak. Daniel put his phone away. But I'm not here because of the lawsuit. I'm here because of her. He turned to Denise, who watched everything with silent tears streaming down her face. Grace Preston died believing she was a failure, Daniel continued, his voice softening. She died thinking she had lost because she wasn't good enough. But the truth is she was robbed. Robbed by her own brother, who used her money to build everything he has. The silence in the room was absolute. Denise spent years sending every penny she earned to help her sick mother, said Daniel. Years working long hours, sacrificing her own life, because a greedy man decided he deserved everything and his sister deserved nothing. Raymond stepped back, his face alternating between fury and panic. This is a scam. You planned this together. She's a gold digger after my money. Your money. Denise finally found her voice. She stood, facing her uncle with a strength that surprised even herself. That money was never yours. It belonged to my mother. It was mine. It was Monique's. She took a step forward. For 23 years you humiliated my family. You called my mother a failure. You called me a disgrace. You made sure to remind us at every reunion, every holiday, every wedding that we were inferior to you. Another step. My mother died at 54. Cancer that could have been treated if she'd had money for better doctors. Money that was hers by right. Raymond stumbled backward, bumping into a table. I found the documents at Grandma's house, said Denise. She kept them all these years. She knew the truth but was afraid of you. My mother was afraid of you. I was afraid of you. She took a deep breath. Not anymore. The man who had terrorized her family for decades seemed to have shrunk by half. He looked around for an escape, but the faces he found held only disgust and condemnation. The courts will decide what happens to the property, said Daniel, approaching Denise and placing his hand on her shoulder. But what happens here now is that everyone in this room finally knows who you really are, Raymond. Not the respectable patriarch. Not the successful businessman. Just a thief who stole from his own sister. Raymond opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, he was completely speechless. It was Monique who broke the silence. She walked up to her uncle, still in her wedding dress, and said with icy calm, "Get out of my wedding. Now." Raymond looked around one last time, searching for anyone at all, who would take his side. He found no one. With slumped shoulders and shattered pride, he walked toward the door. But before he left, Denise said one last thing. "Uncle Raymond?" He stopped without turning. "My mother wasn't a failure. She was the strongest person I've ever known. And wherever she is now, she finally knows the truth." The door closed behind him with a definitive sound. And in the silence that followed, something that had been broken for 23 years finally began to heal. The rest of the party was unlike any family gathering Denise had ever experienced. Without Raymond's shadow looming over everyone, people seemed lighter, freer. Aunts who had never dared defend Grace came to apologize. Cousins who had pretended not to see the humiliation now embraced Denise with tears in their eyes. Monique pulled her sister aside, still processing everything. "Why did you never tell me about the documents?" "Because I couldn't do anything alone." Denise looked at Daniel across the room, politely conversing with curious relatives. "Until last night." "Are you two really together? Or was it all an act?" Denise thought for a moment. "It started as an act. But now, I'm not sure anymore." 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was officially filed. Marcus Webb, Daniel's lawyer, worked with surgical efficiency. The experts confirmed the forgery. The notary office had no records. Witnesses who had remained silent out of fear began to talk. Raymond tried to fight. He hired expensive lawyers, threatened defamation suits, tried to bribe witnesses. But the house of cards he had built on fraud was crumbling, and there wasn't enough money in the world to rebuild it. The settlement came 3 months later. Raymond, facing not only losing the case but also criminal charges for document fraud, agreed to return 60% of all the assets he had accumulated since his father's death. Properties, investments, bank accounts, everything that had been built on the theft of Grace's inheritance. Denise received the news sitting in the same kitchen where, months before, she had cried on the phone thinking she was completely alone. "It's over," Marcus said on the phone. "The judge approved the settlement. The funds will be transferred in 30 days. She hung up and stared into space for a long time. It wasn't joy she felt. It was something deeper, more complex. It was the sensation of a weight finally being removed after carrying it so long she had forgotten what it was like to live without it. Daniel found her like that, standing in the kitchen with silent tears. "Good news." "Justice," she answered simply. "Finally." With the recovered money, Denise did 3 things. First, she bought a new headstone for her mother. Simple, elegant, with an inscription that read, "Grace Preston. Beloved Mother. Silent Warrior." The truth finally prevailed. Second, she created a foundation in Grace's name to help women in vulnerable situations gain access to legal assistance. No one else would lose their inheritance, their dignity, or their peace because they couldn't afford lawyers. Third, she enrolled in law school. "Law?" Daniel had asked when she told him. "I thought your dream was nursing." "It was. But I discovered another one." Denise smiled. "I want to be the lawyer my mother never had. I want to fight for people who can't fight alone." As for Daniel and Denise, what began as a farce transformed into something neither of them had planned. It didn't happen all at once. There were months of long conversations, shared dinners, comfortable silences. Daniel discovered in Denise a strength he deeply admired. Denise found in Daniel a kindness he hid from the world. "You know what surprised me most about you?" Denise said one night, 6 months after Monique's wedding. "What?" "That you saw me. 3 years working in your house and you'd never really seen me. But that night, when you heard me crying, you chose to see." She touched his face. "That changed everything." Daniel held her hand. "You saved me as much as I saved you. I was drowning in an empty house, pretending success was enough. You reminded me it's not." A year after Monique's wedding, on an ordinary autumn day, Daniel asked the question. Not with grand production or elaborate gestures. Just the two of them, sitting on a park bench, watching the leaves fall. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" Denise laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask." Raymond, meanwhile, had moved to another city. Without the stolen money, without the purchased influence, without the family he had manipulated for decades, he was just an old man facing the consequences of his choices. Word was he worked as a salesman at a furniture store, living in a small apartment, completely alone. The same loneliness he had imposed on his sister for so long was now his only companion. On Denise and Daniel's wedding day, Monique was the maid of honor. The ceremony took place in the same small church where everything had begun, but this time there were no shadows, no fears, no masks. Before entering, Denise paused in front of the mirror, holding her bouquet. Around her neck, her mother's only necklace, simple but precious. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "The truth won." And as she walked toward Daniel, surrounded by faces that finally saw her as she always should have been seen, Denise understood something fundamental. The most powerful revenge isn't destroying those who hurt us. It's building the life they tried to steal from us. It's thriving despite their curses. It's proving that our worth never depended on the approval of those who diminished us. Grace Preston had died thinking she was a failure. But her daughter had become a lawyer, a wife, a rightful heir. Every one of Denise's achievements was a testament to the strength her mother had planted in her. And that, more than any lawsuit or recovered money, was the true victory. If this story of justice and triumph touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove sometimes the universe just needs a little push to tip the scales in the right direction.